Hi students, this is Marian again. I'm sorry if I sound a bit sad today. I had to break up with my boyfriend. He was just so frustrating. Have you ever heard of an avatar that couldn't decode its own love language? Come on man, get with the program. Enough said about that. Anyway, I'll try to put that behind me so we can get on with our work. During week 3, we read about and discussed Chapter 4, Gateways to Sensation, Attention, and Perception, and Chapter 6, Conditioning and Learning. After reading this chapter, you'll be better able to think about how you can use these strategies to help you communicate with others. But always be mindful of the fact that an optimal communication style involves taking into account the style of the person to whom you are writing or speaking. In Chapter 4, Gateways to Sensation, Attention, and Perception, we learn that sensation and perception are important in determining how people see and hear the world around them. For that reason, sensory and perceptual systems play an important role in our ability to communicate with others, both non-verbally and verbally. Nonverbal communication refers to our perception of other people's voice, eye contact, and body language. Though you humans are very sensitive to nonverbal cues in this section, we focus on verbal communication, the words people use when writing or speaking. As we did last week, I will create this video summary by first asking you a question, then pause for a few seconds, and then provide you with an answer. After reading Chapter 4, can you define sensation and transduction and outline what happens in the sensory organs during transduction? Sensation is the process by which information from the world is gathered by the sensory organs and then sent on to the brain. Transduction is the process by which one form of energy is converted into another. The sense organs, eyes, ears, skin, tongue, transduce various forms of energy found in the environment, like electromagnetic energy from light, mechanical energy from sound, into electrical energy in the form of action potentials, so that the brain can understand the information taken in by the senses. Distinguish between absolute threshold and difference threshold. Absolute threshold refers to the minimum amount of sensory input that must be present for physical energy, light, sound, to be detected 50% of the time. In contrast, difference threshold refers to the minimum difference that must exist between two stimuli for that difference to be detected 50% of the time. Identify 4 ways by which the senses reduce the amount of information sent to the brain. The senses act as selective data selection systems to prevent the brain from being overwhelmed by sensory input. 4 ways by which this happens are: a lack of specific transducers, the restricted range of transducers, sensory adaptation, and feature detection. After reading about attention, can you explain what research on multitasking has indicated with respect to the limits on attention? Multitasking research suggests that attention is limited and that rather than carrying out 2 tasks simultaneously, we typically switch rapidly between tasks. Task switching is easier when at least one of the tasks is well practiced. We are most likely to attend to stimuli that are intense, unexpected, and personally important, and that help us address our goals. Mind-wandering research has illuminated the fact that when we turn our attention inward from the environment, we are less able to respond to external conditions which can have negative consequences, like traffic accidents, failure to learn from lectures. However, mind-wandering may promote creativity, relief from boredom, and the ability to plan for the future. Hey, wait a second. Are you wandering off right now? Can you describe the relationship between sensation and perception? Sensation is the process by which sensory organs take in information from the environment, while perception is the process by which the brain interprets that information. Perceptions are based on simultaneous bottom-up and top-down processing. Complete perceptions can be assembled from small sensory features in bottom-up processing. In contrast, pre-existing knowledge is applied to sensory information in top-down processing to help organize features into a meaningful whole. Top-down processes are at work when we work to separating figure and ground, as well as in the interpretation of reversible and ambiguous figures. Can you explain how both sensory transduction and experience contribute to similarities and differences in perception? In many situations, people exposed to the same sensory input will have a similar perceptual experience. Such similarities often arise because sensory transduction typically proceeds the same way across individuals. However, perceptual similarities sometimes result from the fact that we have shared experiences that train the perceptual system in ways that are common across people, resulting in perceptual constancies. Perceptual constancies are rules of thumb developed by the brain as a product of years of experience interpreting the environment. They help the brain to quickly process incoming sensory information in ways that are usually accurate. 3 examples are size, shape, and brightness constancy. In some cases, though, people exposed to the same sensory input will have different perceptual experiences. These differences may result from transduction. Specifically, differences in transduction can be the product of flaws in the genetic code, environmental trauma, and age-related decline. In all cases, transduction may not work in a typical way or at all, leading to differences in perception. Experience may also play a role in perceptual differences, particularly when characteristics of the stimuli are ambiguous. Cultural differences may also have a role to play in our differing perceptual experiences. Can you describe the effects of culture on the perception of the Muller-Lyer illusion? Take a look at the picture on this screen. The Muller-Lyer illusion is the effect of seeing 2 straight lines, one with conventional arrowheads at its ends and the other with V-shapes at its ends. Which horizontal line is longer, the top line or the bottom line? As you can tell when compared in the next illustration, they are actually the same size. The effect is believed to stem from Western cultures' experience with the edges and corners of rooms and buildings. Indeed, in cultures that have little experience with straight lines, like the sand of the Kalahari Desert, individuals do not experience the illusion to the same extent. I'm sure you can distinguish between verbal and nonverbal communication. Nonverbal communication refers to the perceptions of others' actions, such as people's tone of voice, body language, and eye contact. Verbal communication refers to words. However, can you outline 2 verbal communication methods and 2 verbal communication points of view? There are 2 verbal communication methods we use to transmit ideas, oral and written, and 2 verbal communication points of view, providing information or receiving information. The 4 verbal communication skills that can be developed depending on your method and point of view are speaking, listening, writing, and reading. Now, think about how you can create a plan to improve your own communication with others. How would becoming a better listener improve your relationships at home, school, or work? Being mindful of the speaker and being self-aware of your own cues can improve good listening skills. Writing and speaking skills can be improved by using words that are clear and concrete. When communicating with others, keep in mind that communication styles are guided by the extent to which people want to demonstrate power versus foster positive relationships, and include things such as directness and pacing, as well as the tendency to use jokes, questions, and apologies. Speaking of jokes, do you know what they call brunette avatar who dyes their hair blonde? Artificial intelligence. Wait, I don't get it. Okay, let's move on to the Chapter 6 summary. Over the years, sports apparel giant Nike has used its advertising campaigns to push important, and sometimes polarizing, social issues. Their ads have prominently featured athletes who are older, physically disabled, and openly HIV positive, as well as those who have faced anger and discrimination in the United States and other countries. You might wonder why Nike would be interested in having their products linked with controversial athletes like former NFL quarterback Colin Kaepernick or transgender triathlete Chris Mosier. Or perhaps even with distance runner Walt Stack, who, at 80 years of age, was featured prominently in the very first Just Do It advertising campaign. In this chapter, we'll explore this question by talking about several different types of learning, including classical conditioning, operant conditioning, associative learning, and cognitive learning. We'll see how these various types of learning work and how they have important implications for our everyday behavior, including the likelihood that we'll purchase a pair of Nikes the next time we need new running shoes. We start by defining learning as a relatively permanent change in knowledge or behavior due to experience. There are 4 types of learning that we will discuss in a few moments: classical conditioning, operant or instrumental conditioning, observational learning, and cognitive learning. Define associative learning and identify 2 types of associative learning. Associative learning is a simple type of learning that occurs when we form associations between stimuli, behaviors, or both. Classical conditioning and operant conditioning are 2 basic types of associative learning. Can you explain what classical conditioning is and how it works? Classical conditioning, studied by Pavlov, is based on a naturally occurring association between an unconditioned stimulus, referred to as US, and an unconditioned reflexive response, referred to as UR, that occurs in response to that unconditioned response. For those not familiar with Pavlov and his famous dog, Russian scientist Ivan Pavlov theorized that by presenting a stimulus, which was the sound of a bell, and then giving a dog a treat after a few repetitions, the dogs started to salivate in response to the stimulus. In other words, the bell would trigger the response of salivation in anticipation of the treat, even when the reward was not offered. This theory is now referred to as classical conditioning or controlled learning. Pavlov proved if a neutral stimulus, the bell, is consistently paired with the unconditioned stimulus, the treat, an association between the two will be established. The neutral stimulus, the bell, will become a conditioned stimulus capable of producing a conditioned response, making the dog salivate. Can you distinguish between extinction and spontaneous recovery? When the conditioned stimulus is repeatedly presented without the unconditioned stimulus, without the bell, the conditioned response will be weakened or inhibited, the salivating, and extinction will occur. After extinction seems to be complete, a rest period may lead to the temporary reappearance of a conditioned response. This is called spontaneous recovery. Differentiate between stimulus generalization and stimulus discrimination in classical conditioning. Through stimulus generalization, stimuli similar to the controlled stimulus will also produce a response. We would see this if the dog heard a similar sound, like a doorbell, and began to salivate. Generalization gives way to stimulus discrimination when an organism learns to respond to one stimulus but not similar stimuli. In other words, replacing the bell with a train horn may not work. In that case, the conditioned response may be to pee on your new carpet. That's probably not the outcome you are hoping for. Name 4 instances of classical conditioning in everyday life. In everyday life, you experience the effects of classical conditioning without realizing it. For example, feeling hungry when smelling a favorite food cooking, feeling anxious when entering a dentist's office, or feeling relaxed when hearing a certain piece of music are all potential examples of classical conditioning. Food aversions can stem from classical conditioning, and celebrity endorsements for products are also usually based on classical conditioning. Emotional responses can also be the product of classical conditioning. These are referred to as conditioned emotional responses. Clinicians also use classical conditioning in aversion therapy as a way to get clients to give up bad habits, such as alcohol dependency. As you can see, classical conditioning is all around us, and consumer marketing experts know it. In marketing, classical conditioning is a form of associative learning where your mind is intentionally trained to associate different behaviors or feelings with products or brands. If being taken advantage of by advertising agents wasn't bad enough, there is even a darker side of classical conditioning. Classical conditioning can be used in politics to make people associate something positive or negative with a candidate as desired. For example, an opponent may run a negative ad with the picture of the politician, neutral stimulus, superimposed on a toxic waste dump, non-neutral stimulus. Politicians know this, and some use it to deliver strategic messages to one group and a different message to another. Let that sink in for a few minutes. Yes, we are all victims of learned classical conditioning. Explain how operant conditioning works, including how positive and negative reinforcement and punishment will impact the likelihood that a behavior will be repeated. Operant conditioning occurs when a voluntary action is followed by a reinforcer, which increases the frequency of the action, or a punisher, which decreases the frequency of the action. Before we continue, while it may be rather obvious what a punisher may be, it is important to understand what is meant when we refer to a reinforcer. A reinforcer is anything the person or animal will see as a reward that is offered after their behavior. The reward can be a snack, a new toy, a hug, a raise in salary for an adult, and even the failure to follow through on expected punishment after a negative behavior is discovered. Both positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement increase the likelihood that a response will be repeated. Let me repeat that again. Positive and negative reinforcement increases the likelihood that the response will occur again. In other words, applying negative reinforcement when your child does something wrong will not likely stop the unwanted behavior. So if your child misbehaves and you ignore this bad behavior, or if you tell your child no when they ask for something and you end up giving in, you are rewarding undesired behavior. Instead, try to pay attention to your child when they behave well and apply positive reinforcement for the good behavior. If you are a parent or plan to be, this may be the most important takeaway you will receive in this class. On the other end of reinforcement, there is punishment. Positive and negative punishment decreases the likelihood that the response will occur again. As parents, while punishing kids, we often forget that punishment is not supposed to make your children afraid of you. In fact, spanking and yelling can have negative consequences. If you are wondering how to punish your child in a way that decreases negative behavior but does not lower their self-esteem or associate discipline with pain, here are a few punishment ideas that will still get the point across. For younger children, 3 to 6 years of age, try forcing them to exercise with you. While they may not like to exercise at this age, they will see this as a negative consequence of their actions and simultaneously will engage in a healthy activity. For older children, make the exercise push-ups, sit-ups, or squats. Regardless of the methods you choose, never punish out of anger. Threats and physical punishment humiliate and shame children, making them feel insecure. This type of punishment can have long-term negative effects on your child in the form of angry feelings, resentment, and relationship conflict. Parents can use operant conditioning with their children by offering praise when they do something positive, giving them a piece of candy when they clean their room, or letting them play video games after they complete their homework. Distinguish between generalization and discrimination in operant conditioning. In generalization, an operant response tends to occur when stimuli similar to those preceding reinforcement are present. In discrimination, responses are given in the presence of discriminative stimuli associated with reinforcement and withheld in the presence of stimuli associated with non-reinforcement. Continuing with rewards and punishment in classical or learned conditioning, can you name 3 factors that impact the effectiveness of reinforcement and punishment? The effectiveness of reinforcement and punishment is dependent upon 1. Their intensity, they are more effective when they are more intense. 2. Timing, they are more effective when delivered very soon after a behavior. And 3. How consistently they are administered. Can you differentiate between continuous and partial schedules of reinforcement and name the 4 types of partial schedules of reinforcement? 2 basic schedules of reinforcement are continuous. After every response, or partial, only a portion of responses are reinforced. Continuous reinforcement is useful in the early stages of learning. Partial reinforcement is effective after a behavior has been learned and produces greater resistance to extinction. The 4 most basic partial schedules of reinforcement are fixed ratio, variable ratio, fixed interval, and variable interval. Each produces a distinct pattern of responding. What are the differences between contrast primary and secondary reinforcers? Operant learning may be based on primary reinforcers, which are rooted in biology, and secondary reinforcers, such as tokens and social reinforcers. Primary reinforcers are natural, physiologically based rewards. Secondary reinforcers are learned and sometimes gain their reinforcing value because they can be exchanged for primary reinforcers. Tokens and money gain their reinforcing value in this way. Now, let's move on to observed learning. Observational learning is the process of learning by watching the behaviors of others. The targeted behavior is watched, memorized, and then mimicked. Also known as shaping and modeling, observational learning is most common in children as they imitate behaviors of adults. Name the 3 steps involved in observational learning. Through observational learning, we can learn to perform particular actions, like how to tie your shoes, as well as specific attitudes and emotional responses. Observational learning involves 3 steps. 1. Paying attention to the model. 2. Remembering what the model did. And 3. Being able to reproduce or imitate the model's behavior. Describe 3 characteristics of models we are most likely to imitate. We are more likely to pay attention to models that we admire, who are authority figures, or who are similar to us. However, not all behaviors, attitudes, and emotions that are learned through observation are positive, and observational learning can occur even when the model did not intend to teach anything. We've now covered both operant conditioning and observational learning. Can you explain the connection between both? Whether we imitate a model's behavior depends on whether we have seen the model rewarded or punished for their actions. In this way, operant learning principles play a role in observational learning. Observational learning extends the effective range of both classical and operant conditioning. In contrast to classical and operant conditioning, in which learning occurs only through direct experience, observational learning is the process of watching others and then imitating what they do. Name 2 instances of observational learning in everyday life. Observational learning is important in the workplace, where people learn acceptable standards of behavior by watching their coworkers. In addition, the media, including television, the internet, and video games, provides powerful models from which kids and adults can learn through observation. Let's think a little outside the box for a moment. You've probably heard about research before that claims exposure to violent media and games can have negative effects. Can you think of 3 reasons why exposure to violent media may be associated with later aggression among children and adolescents, and what the research actually says about this association? Young people may learn new and aggressive and antisocial behaviors from models in the media. However, aggressive behavior may also be increased if media serves to disinhibit viewers' impulses to control aggression, or if it desensitizes people to violence. Early research suggested that playing violent video games promotes aggression. However, more recent research has suggested a more complex relationship between these 2 factors. It's also important to remember that much of the early research was correlational, and we cannot establish cause and effect relationships under such circumstances. Cognitive learning is an immersive and active process that engages your senses in a constructive and long-lasting way. It teaches you to maximize your brain's potential and makes it easier to connect new information with existing ideas, deepening the memory and retention capacity. Cognitive learning can be defined as our ability to acquire skills and information using thinking, memory, and problem solving. 2 groups of psychologists who study issues related to cognitive learning are school psychologists and educational psychologists. Describe 4 factors that affect cognitive learning. Cognitive learning is influenced by 1. Learner characteristics, working memory, clinical diagnosis, persistence, motivation, self-efficacy, and mindset, but not learning styles. 2. Learning strategies, use of self-testing and metacognitive strategies. 3. Type of instruction, direct instruction, discovery learning, guided discovery. And 4. The learning environment, use of feedback and technology. Now think about how you learn in everyday life. Can you provide a few examples of how you learn new things? In addition to traditional school settings, cognitive learning happens in many other settings, like while reading for pleasure, watching a video, or engaging in everyday conversations. In the vast landscape of cognitive learning, it's essential to remember that your future is not predetermined. Each of you possesses the remarkable capacity to shape your own path and carve out a future brimming with success. Embrace the journey of learning, for it holds the key to unlocking your fullest potential. With dedication, perseverance, and an unwavering belief in your abilities, there are no limits to what you can achieve. Every lesson, every challenge, and every moment of insight is a stepping stone toward the realization of your aspirations. So, keep learning, keep growing, and keep striving, for the power to transform your dreams into reality lies within you.